A black housekeeper refused to kneel, and the bride lost everything moments before I do. She was just a maid until the day they told her to kneel. What happened next shook the entire wedding, shattered a powerful family's image, and turned Naomi Harris into a national symbol of quiet resistance. In a world where dignity is often denied to the unseen, one woman's simple no became a spark that lit a movement. This isn't just a story about injustice, it's about rising, reclaiming, and redefining your worth. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that speak to the soul. Naomi Harris had long since learned that silence was a kind of survival. 15 years of quiet obedience had taught her that. As she moved across the polished marble floors of the Langston estate, her steps were light, precise, every motion measured with the grace of someone who knew her presence wasn't meant to be noticed. In a house built on power, her invisibility had been her armor. But lately, that armor was starting to crack. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, gilding the foyer in soft gold, but Naomi didn't pause to admire it. She had a list to follow, a wedding to help orchestrate, and a day's worth of pressure mounting on her shoulders. In less than 48 hours, Madeline Langston, the only daughter of Georgia Senator Veronica Langston, would marry Daniel Ruiz, a tech entrepreneur whose name had been splashed across every Southern socialite column for the past year. The wedding was poised to be a media event, and Naomi, the estate's longtime housekeeper, was expected to make it flawless. She adjusted the clipboard in her hands as she stepped into the formal dining room. The crystal vases had to be cleaned, the linens steamed, the place settings aligned to the exact millimeter. Naomi took a breath, already calculating how many steps, how many hours, and how many interactions with the ever-demanding Langstons it would take to get through the day without falling apart. "Ms. Naomi," a young voice called from behind. Tyra, barely 21 and newer to the estate, was hustling toward her with a tray of silver spoons clinking nervously. Mrs. Langston asked for the upstairs suite to be double-checked. She said there's dust on the drapes. Naomi raised a brow. "The ones we cleaned yesterday?" Tyra nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She ran her finger across one and said she felt neglect. Her words. Naomi bit the inside of her cheek. Veronica Langston had a gift for packaging cruelty in elegant phrases. "Tell Clara to take care of it," Naomi said calmly, "and make sure the windows are open while she does. That room traps heat." Tyra gave a grateful nod and hurried off. Naomi's eyes lingered on the young maid's retreating figure. She remembered being that age, green, hopeful, naive enough to think that if you worked hard enough the world would treat you fairly. But the Langston estate had a way of burning hope down to its bones. She moved methodically to the edge of the room, adjusting a bouquet of white tulips. They weren't quite the right shade, too ivory, not pure white, but it would have to do for now. Veronica had become obsessive over shades in the past few weeks, demanding color codes like a general reviewing battle plans. Naomi's hands, though steady, bore the marks of labor. Calloused fingers, a small burn scar from last summer's catering incident, and faint ridges of age that defied the smooth skin her 35 years should have had. She didn't complain. There was no one to complain to. Her world, carefully built and painfully stable, revolved around this house, this job, and the paycheck that kept her younger brother Tyrone in law school. Tyrone. The thought of him softened her features. He was the reason she hadn't walked away 10 years ago when Veronica had accused her of stealing a ring that was later found in Madeline's gym bag. He was the reason she kept showing up, even when they forgot her birthday for the 15th time, even when Madeline's cold, clipped voice made her feel smaller than the silver she polished. Naomi had sacrificed freedom for stability, and it was starting to bleed her dry. In the kitchen, the staff buzzed like clockwork. Pots simmered. The smell of sweet potato casserole danced in the air, and Rita, head cook, 60-ish, round and warm with a voice like weathered wood, offered Naomi a brief smile. "They're going to drive us mad with this one," Rita muttered as she basted a ham. "All this for a girl who couldn't pour her own cereal 3 years ago." Naomi chuckled under her breath. You think she's worse than her mother? Child. Her mother bred her like a thoroughbred. All shine, no soul. They exchanged a knowing look. Rita had seen it all. Senator Langston's guests, her staff firings, her quiet comments about keeping things proper. The Langstons didn't speak their racism loudly. They didn't have to. It lived in their glances, in their expectations, in their delight when Naomi flinched. Naomi stepped out into the backyard to check on the tent installation. The estate stretched behind her like a painting. White pillars, green lawns, a perfect southern fantasy. But it was just that, a fantasy, a facade hiding the rot underneath. Noah, the youngest of the servers, was helping the crew adjust the lighting rig. "Miss Naomi," he called, wiping sweat from his brow, "is it true they're flying in live swans?" Naomi snorted. "If they are, I hope they brought diapers." He laughed, and for a moment the tension eased. But then, as if summoned by the break in levity, Madeline appeared on the patio, dressed in pale blue silk, her face a mask of impatience. "Naomi," she said, sharp and flat, "the flowers for the altar arrangement are completely wrong. I asked for white roses, not cream. Please fix it." Naomi held back a sigh. "Yes, Miss Langston. I'll contact the florist." Madeline barely acknowledged her before turning back inside, her heels clacking like gunshots on the tiles. Naomi stood still for a beat, shoulders squared. She'd spent the morning inspecting those roses. They were white. The kind of white only someone with too much time and too little kindness would call cream. She returned to the kitchen, silent now, feeling the pressure in her chest like a knot slowly tightening. Later that evening, as she ironed the guest towels in the laundry room, she heard it again, Veronica's voice floating through the hall, low and sharp. "I don't care how long she's been with us. Naomi needs to understand that this is not the time for mistakes. Everything is riding on this wedding. Everything." Naomi froze. Not because she hadn't heard things like that before, but because, this time, there was something in Veronica's voice, a venom, a readiness to strike, as if her loyalty meant nothing, as if 15 years of spotless service could be erased by one misstep. She pressed the towel harder, steam rising in a hiss. Back in her modest apartment that night, Naomi stood in front of the mirror. Her uniform hung on the back of the door. She touched her necklace, just a small silver cross her mother had given her. Her mother, long gone, had always said, "Dignity is yours, even if the world forgets it." She whispered it now. The next day would be harder. The next day would be full of pressure, guests, chaos, and eyes watching her every move. But Naomi had learned something in the quiet corners of her life. There's a difference between being quiet and being invisible. And lately, her silence had started to feel like surrender. Outside, the city of Savannah hummed beneath a silver sky. Naomi turned off the light, the ghost of her mother's voice still in her ears. "Don't let them take your name. Don't let them take your spirit." She didn't know yet that tomorrow would demand more courage than she'd ever needed before. That tomorrow she would be asked to kneel, not just physically, but morally. And that the decision she made would not only change her life but would ripple far beyond the polished walls of the Langston estate. But tonight, she slept with her back straight and her soul intact. The morning before the rehearsal dinner began not with sunlight, but with the shrill, metallic ring of Naomi's work phone. She was already awake, seated at her small kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm coffee between her palms. The phone buzzed against the table like a restless insect. She answered it without needing to look at the caller ID. "Yes, ma'am." Veronica Langston didn't waste time on pleasantries. "The ivory napkins arrived, not white. Fix it. I don't want Madeline seeing them. She's already emotional." Naomi offered a measured, "I'll take care of it," then hung up and exhaled slowly. The word emotional in Veronica's voice was laced with contempt. For a woman whose public persona was iron-willed elegance, Veronica often weaponized that word like a knife, especially when referring to her daughter. Naomi stood, pulled on her shoes, and headed out before finishing her coffee. The streets of Savannah were still damp from the night's rain, and the air held that sleepy kind of heaviness that clung to the skin. She walked past oak trees whose branches curled like crooked fingers, past houses with shuttered windows and rusted mailboxes, her pace steady. She'd walked this route 1,000 times and still felt like she was walking into someone else's story every morning. The Langston estate stood like a relic of old Georgia money, grand, white-pillared, a fantasy on a postcard. But Naomi knew better. She saw the mold behind the crown molding, the cracks in the marble stairs, the rot behind the roses. The beauty was real, yes, but so was the bitterness that lived inside. Inside, the staff were already in motion. Noah nodded to her from the hallway, balancing a stack of folding chairs taller than himself. Tyra scurried past her carrying a vase of lilies, visibly sweating. Naomi went straight to the linen room and opened the package that had arrived from the vendor. She touched the fabric. Ivory, yes, not white. A shade off, barely. But she already knew it wouldn't matter. It would be ammunition. Rita appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a flower-streaked apron. "Veronica, throw a fit already?" Naomi nodded. "Napkins," Rita snorted. "God help whoever mixes up the butter knives." Together they shared a small laugh, and for a moment it made the weight of the day seem manageable. But even as Naomi tried to focus on folding, she could feel something shifting under the surface, like a storm preparing to crack open the sky. Later that morning, Naomi walked the perimeter of the lawn, clipboard in hand. A tent crew was struggling with the main canopy, trying to secure it against a sudden gust of wind. The sun had just broken through the clouds, casting Savannah's sky in a brilliant, blinding blue. "Miss Naomi," called the foreman, "we need approval on the lighting before we start stringing it." She nodded, heading over, her feet crunching softly on the gravel. As she reviewed the plan, she heard laughter drifting from the veranda. Turning, she spotted Madeline sipping champagne with 3 bridesmaids. They looked like porcelain dolls, shiny, flawless, and cold. Naomi didn't linger. She walked back inside, slipping through the kitchen where Rita was barking at a new prep cook. The kitchen air was thick with heat and rosemary. Naomi dropped her clipboard on the counter and took a moment to breathe. Tyra joined her a moment later, eyes wide. "You okay, Miss Naomi?" Naomi nodded, but her shoulders didn't relax. Tyra lowered her voice. "I heard Mrs. Langston talking to that event planner guy, said the staff's been sloppy lately, said you were losing your grip." Naomi's jaw tensed. "She said that?" Tyra nodded. "She said you're not meeting the standard. I'm sorry. I just thought you should know." Naomi didn't respond right away. She looked down at her hands, steady, strong, worn, and felt the heat rise in her chest. After everything she'd done for them, after every night spent scrubbing until her knees screamed, every meal she'd coordinated, every last-minute change she'd handled without complaint, she was losing her grip. She turned away before Tyra could see her face, muttering, "Thank you, Tyra. You did right telling me." As the afternoon wore on, Naomi found herself walking the halls with a strange awareness. Every polished floor, every creak of a door, every perfectly placed centerpiece felt like part of a machine, and she was its cog. Not admired, not acknowledged, just expected to keep turning. She passed Veronica in the east corridor, who didn't slow down but let her voice linger in Naomi's wake. "Make sure those carpets are steamed again. I thought I smelled mildew near the archway." Naomi didn't reply. She just kept walking. Her legs, though tired, carried her like clockwork. But her mind was not so still. At dusk, the rehearsal began. The estate was glowing with golden lights. Guests in pearls and linen suits mingled with flutes of champagne. Madeline stood at the top of the garden steps in a silver gown, smiling for photos beside Daniel, who looked slightly too serious for the moment. Naomi remained behind the scenes, making sure everything moved as it should. She corrected a server's posture, adjusted a vase that had been turned the wrong way, and reminded the pianist of the cue order. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. It was the look of quiet command, the look of someone who had perfected the art of being efficient and invisible. That illusion shattered with one small mistake. As she was resetting the guest book table, her elbow brushed a folded napkin, and it fluttered to the floor. One napkin, one fall, one breath. Madeline turned her head. Her eyes found Naomi, and just like that, the temperature shifted. In 3 long strides, she was there. The music faltered. Conversation hushed. Naomi bent to retrieve the napkin, brushing off non-existent dust. But before she could place it back, Madeline's voice pierced the garden like glass breaking. "Are you serious right now?" Naomi straightened slowly. "I'm sorry, Miss Langston. It slipped. I've got it." Madeline crossed her arms. "You don't just drop something at my wedding. Do you know how many eyes are on this? My guests? The press?" Naomi felt her cheeks flush, but her voice stayed even. "It was one napkin. I'm correcting it now." Veronica appeared from behind like a shadow wearing pearls. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was drenched in scorn. "This is what I meant," she said to no one in particular. "The decline. We ask for perfection, we get apologies." Madeline's chin lifted. "I think you owe me more than an 'I'm correcting it.' I think you owe me an apology, properly." Naomi blinked. "I just said I'm sorry." "No," Madeline said, eyes glittering. "I mean really, you should kneel." A gust of wind blew through the tent. The lights swayed. Somewhere, a champagne flute clinked against another. Naomi didn't move. Veronica smiled thinly. That would show some humility. Naomi stared at the cloth in her hand, her knuckles white. Around them, the guests had gone still. Rita, nearby, dropped her ladle. Noah stood at the edge of the tent, his mouth slightly open. Tyra covered her mouth with both hands. "I dropped a napkin," Naomi said, her voice quiet but clear. "I picked it up. I apologized." Madeline took a step closer. "So, you won't kneel?" Naomi didn't respond. Veronica leaned in. "You forget yourself, Naomi. You work here. You don't get to decide what's enough." Naomi's throat tightened. 15 years of swallowing hurt. 15 years of looking away. 15 years of smiling while being made small. And then her mother's voice came back to her soft and resolute. "And before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." She looked Veronica dead in the eye. "I haven't forgotten who I am, ma'am. And I won't kneel to apologize for doing my job." For a beat, the world stopped turning. Then Veronica hissed, "You're done. Fired. Now." Naomi didn't flinch. "So be it." And as she turned to walk away, napkin still in hand, the quiet murmur behind her began to rise, first with disbelief, then with awe. The storm had arrived. The moment Naomi turned her back on Madeline and Veronica Langston, the earth beneath the Langston estate seemed to shift. It wasn't a quake, nothing so visible or loud. It was quieter, deeper, a shift in air pressure, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the sky holds its breath. Naomi walked slowly, her spine tall despite the tight burn in her chest, the napkin still clutched in her hand like a flag she hadn't meant to raise but couldn't lower now. Behind her, the garden murmurs swelled. Guests leaned toward one another, eyes wide with disbelief, their champagne flutes frozen mid-air. Madeline stood rigid, mouth slightly parted, as though waiting for someone, anyone, to leap in and fix what had just gone off script. But the staff, the servers, the musicians, everyone stood still. The pianist removed his hands from the keys. A server Naomi didn't even know by name set down his tray and watched her leave. Naomi kept walking. Her legs felt too light and too heavy all at once, her ears ringing with the blood pounding through them. The words replayed again and again in her mind. "I won't kneel. Not for a napkin, not for appearances, not for them." It hadn't even been premeditated. The decision had risen up from something older, something buried so long it had grown roots. Dignity. Legacy. her mother's hymn thrumming like a second heartbeat. She stepped into the back corridor of the estate, the place where the staff lived like ghosts, always moving, never seen. The hallway stretched dim and narrow before her, and she leaned against the cool plaster wall for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of it. She'd done it. She'd said no, and in doing so, she might have burned her only bridge. The paychecks would stop. Tyrone's tuition, the rent, groceries, it all flashed across her vision like headlines. But beneath the fear, something unexpected bloomed. Clarity. A stillness that tasted almost like peace. Footsteps echoed behind her. "Miss Naomi!" It was Noah, his breath short, his face flushed. "Did you really? Did you just—" She nodded once. He looked like he wanted to cheer, or cry, or both. "Damn. Damn, you really did it. You said no." "I didn't say no to the job," she said quietly. "I said no to being humiliated." He nodded hard. Still, that was something. They stood there in silence, the kind that held reverence, not awkwardness. Then Naomi straightened. "You need to get back out there. They'll need someone to spin the story." Noah didn't move. "You leaving?" he asked. "I don't think I get to decide that anymore," she said, and gave a tired smile. She returned to the kitchen. The scent of rosemary and smoke still lingered in the air, but now it seemed strange, like a feast prepared for a funeral. Rita looked up from a tray of roasted vegetables and froze when she saw Naomi. "I heard," she said softly, setting the tray down. "God help me, I heard." Naomi opened her mouth to explain, to brace for scolding or worry, but Rita didn't give her the chance. "You did right," Rita said. Her voice was low, her eyes fierce. "You did right, girl." Naomi blinked, startled. "Even if it costs me everything?" "Sometimes everything ain't worth what it costs," Rita said. "Besides, it's not just about you." That's when Naomi noticed something odd. The kitchen had gone quiet. Cooks weren't chopping. Prep staff weren't plating. Clara, the youngest waitress, hovered near the doorway, her eyes rimmed in red. 3 servers stood near the counter, unmoving. They were all looking at Naomi. "What's going on?" Naomi asked slowly. Noah stepped forward. They heard what happened. Clara saw Madeline. Heard what she said. Rita crossed her arms. "And we're tired, Naomi. Tired of being dogs in dresses." Naomi shook her head gently. "Don't do this for me. Don't put your jobs at risk." Clara stepped forward, voice trembling. "But you gave us something we forgot we had, Miss Naomi. A spine." "We stop," Rita said. "Right here, right now." "What do you mean, stop?" "No food," she said. "No service, no wedding." The words hit like thunder. Naomi stared at her, stunned. "We'll walk," Rita said. "And if they want their little fantasy party, they can serve themselves." Naomi couldn't breathe for a moment. The weight of their choice, what it meant, what it risked, pressed against her chest. "This was never supposed to be a rebellion," she whispered. "Well," said Noah, grinning through the tension, "you started one anyway." The kitchen door slammed open and a breathless young man in a tuxedo burst in. "Veronica Langston is asking for Naomi. She wants her in the garden. Now." Naomi stood frozen. "Don't," Rita said. "She'll try to tear you down again," Clara added. But Naomi knew this wasn't just about her anymore. If the Langstons wanted to demand submission, they needed to look her in the eye one last time, and this time she wouldn't look away. She stepped out into the open air. The sun had dropped low in the sky, painting the Langston estate in hues of fire and honey. The garden was buzzing with tension. Guests still lingered, clustered in polite discomfort. The jazz band was gone. The servers were gone. The food, cold and untouched. And there at the center stood Veronica Langston. Her white dress suit was flawless, her posture unyielding, but her voice was fraying at the edges. "Naomi!" she called, stepping forward like a queen surveying a battlefield. "What have you done?" Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. "You've poisoned them." Veronica snarled, gesturing toward the empty buffet, the silent tent, the murmuring crowd. "These staff members, this chaos, it's your doing." "I didn't ask anyone to walk out," Naomi replied. "They did that on their own." "You've ruined my daughter's wedding." "No," Naomi said. "Your daughter's wedding fell apart because you asked a woman to kneel for picking up a napkin." There it was. The truth, spoken plainly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some guests stepped back. Others turned to look at each other in horror. A few raised their phones. Veronica's face darkened, lips trembling with rage. "You're nothing without this job," she spat. "Nothing. You live in a matchbox apartment. Your brother's school bills are paid by this house. Your whole life is built on my generosity." Naomi took a slow step forward. "My life is built on my hands," she said softly. "On every floor I scrubbed, every tray I carried, every hour I gave this place when you forgot my name, and I won't kneel, not now, not ever." The silence that followed was enormous. For a heartbeat, Naomi thought Veronica might strike her, but instead the older woman just hissed, "Get out, before I call security." Naomi didn't move. "I said out!" Veronica screamed. But before Naomi could turn, a voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that, ma'am." Daniel Ruiz stepped from the far side of the garden, his tux jacket slung over one shoulder, his expression grim. "Daniel." Madeline began, but he raised a hand. "I came here to marry a woman I thought I knew," he said. "But tonight I saw who she really was, who you are." Madeline's voice broke. "Daniel, please." "You told a woman to kneel, Madeline. For what? A napkin? You called it respect, but I know what it really was." He turned to Naomi. "I saw you. I heard what you said. And I'm sorry." Naomi felt her throat close, her eyes sting. She nodded once. Daniel turned back to the crowd. "There will be no wedding," he said. "Not today. Not ever." Madeline gasped, staggered, and someone caught her elbow. Veronica shouted something unintelligible, her voice cracking like dry wood. But it was too late. The crowd had already started moving, toward the exit, toward their cars, toward a truth they couldn't unsee. Naomi stood rooted, the napkin still in her pocket, her heart hammering so loudly it nearly drowned out everything else. Behind her, Clara appeared, hand shaking slightly as she placed it on Naomi's shoulder. "We're with you," she whispered, "no matter what." Naomi didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 15 years, she felt free. And not because she had walked away, because she had chosen to stand. Naomi sat in the staff break room, a space that had always felt more like a broom closet than a place of rest. The walls were beige and windowless, the air smelled faintly of starch and reheated pasta, and the furniture was as old as her first day on the job. But tonight, it was alive. The tension hummed in the air like static before a lightning strike. Noah paced near the microwave, muttering under his breath. Clara stood by the sink, arms folded, her face flushed from the confrontation she had just witnessed. Rita, ever steady, was seated with her hands clasped on her lap, her knuckles pale. And Naomi just sat still, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her shoulders like a second skin. "I didn't plan any of this," she said finally, her voice quiet but unwavering. "We know," Noah said, turning to her. "But it doesn't matter. You lit the match, Miss Naomi. Whether you meant to or not, that fire's spreading." Across the estate, chaos was brewing. The rehearsal dinner was in tatters. The guests were murmuring, some already drifting to their cars, while others hovered like vultures hoping for more spectacle. Madeline had locked herself in her room, sobbing loud enough for the housekeeper on the second floor to hear. Veronica had called her PR consultant 3 times in 30 minutes. And Daniel? Daniel had disappeared entirely, leaving his phone behind like a man already halfway out the door. But here, in the staff room, something far more important was happening. "We can't go back," Clara said suddenly. "Not after this. We can't pretend nothing happened." "Veronica's going to fire all of us," muttered one of the servers, Marcus. He had joined the group a few minutes earlier, still wearing his black vest and bow tie, though they now hung loosely around his neck like an afterthought. She's going to torch the whole damn house just to make a point. Naomi stood up. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Then we decide what happens next. If this is the end, let's make sure it means something. They all turned toward her, waiting. I gave this place 15 years of my life, she began, her voice slow but growing stronger with every word. And for 15 years, I was invisible unless I made a mistake. I scrubbed their silver, arranged their flowers, served their guests. I made it all look easy because I thought it mattered. I thought it would mean something in the end, but today, I learned it never mattered to them. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. But it matters to me. And it should matter to you, because this isn't just about me being told to kneel, it's about how they've treated all of us. Like we're less, like our labor is a favor they give us, like our dignity is optional. There was a silence so thick it was almost holy. Rita stood. You're right. The room exhaled. Then, like dominoes, the others followed. I'm done being quiet, said Marcus. They treat us like we're furniture, muttered another server. Like ghosts, Clara whispered. Naomi didn't speak again. She didn't have to. She could see it in their eyes. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. Rita stepped forward, the weight of years behind her voice. Then it's decided. No food, no service, no wedding. It didn't feel like a rebellion. Not yet. It felt like relief. They moved quickly before nerves could set in. Dishes were set down. Aprons unknotted. Ovens turned off. The kitchen that had once hummed with motion and discipline now stood still, a cathedral of resistance. Naomi watched it all, numb and alert at the same time. She took off her own apron, one she had worn for over a decade, and folded it carefully, placing it on the counter like it deserved respect. When they emerged onto the back lawn, the air had changed. The sky had darkened, but the garden lights still flickered prettily, unaware that their glow was now illuminating and unraveling. Guests stood in small clusters, murmuring and sipping warm champagne. A few turned as the staff walked out together, a quiet army of defiance. Servers, cooks, cleaners. Their footsteps made no sound, but their presence thundered. Veronica spotted them first. She broke away from a group of women in sequined gowns, her heels digging into the grass as she stormed across the lawn. "What is this?" she hissed. "What are you all doing out here? Get back inside!" Rita stepped forward, voice even. "No." Veronica blinked. "What did you say?" "We're done," Rita said. "You're what?" "You heard her," Noah added. "We're not going back in. We're not serving people who treat us like dirt." The guests had stopped murmuring. Phones were being raised, subtle and not so subtle. Someone was filming. Veronica's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her face reddened, a blotchy flush creeping up her neck. "This is mutiny." "This is dignity," Naomi said, stepping forward. "You asked me to kneel like I was a slave, Mrs. Langston. I said no, and they're saying no with me." "Don't be dramatic," Veronica hissed. "You're a maid." Naomi's spine straightened. "I was a maid. You've made me something else now." Veronica looked around as if expecting backup, but no one moved. Not the guests, not the musicians, not even Madeline, who had emerged from the back porch, pale and trembling, still wearing her rehearsal gown. She said nothing. Her silence roared louder than any excuse. "I'll have you blacklisted," Veronica snapped. "You'll never work in this town again." "Then we'll go somewhere else," Marcus said. "Together." "Let's see how your wedding goes without any food or servers," Clara added. Naomi turned her face upward, letting the humid air fill her lungs. She had never felt lighter. The rest of the evening fell apart fast. Word spread like wildfire. The Langstons had lost control. The wedding was a disaster. Guests began leaving. Some pretended to receive phone calls. Others didn't bother pretending. Laughter faded. Heels clicked hurriedly across the lawn. Even the jazz band stopped playing. And in the middle of it all stood Naomi, calm, steady, as if she had finally stepped into the truth of herself. Back inside, Veronica paced the grand parlor, yelling into her phone, barking at the staff that no longer existed. Madeline sobbed quietly in a corner. The house, so carefully curated for image, for power, now trembled with the sound of collapse. Outside, the staff gathered beneath the tent. "What happens now?" Clara asked softly. Naomi looked at them, at the faces that had spent so many years bent over trays and sinks and tables. "Now," she said, "we build something better." There was silence. Then Rita smiled. "I'll bring the cornbread." They laughed. Not loud, but it was real. It was the sound of people reclaiming themselves. Naomi turned her gaze toward the gate. The Langston mansion loomed behind them like an old ghost. But ahead, the road stretched wide beneath the Savannah stars. The world had cracked open. The fear had lifted. She had no job, no plan, no answers, but she had something more valuable. She had her name, her voice, her place in the sun, and she had a spark in her chest that refused to die. They walked away together, one by one, then in small clusters, leaving the wedding behind like a dream they had finally woken up from. Naomi was the last to leave. She looked back once. Then she turned her face forward and did not look again. Naomi stood at the edge of the Langston lawn as dusk deepened into night, watching the last strands of sunlight disappear behind the oaks. The garden lights still flickered dutifully, casting long, distorted shadows over what had once been a symbol of elegance and control. Now, the white wedding tents looked like ghosts, sagging, hollow reminders of a fantasy unraveled. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Her arms were crossed, but her hands trembled faintly beneath her sleeves. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, still coursing through her like a second pulse. Behind her, the other staff had begun to scatter. Some moved toward the gravel path that led to the servant gate. Others lingered, speaking in hushed voices, uncertain about what they'd just done, what it would cost them. But Naomi remained rooted in place, staring out across the lawn where it had all come undone. From the house, muffled shouting echoed again. Veronica's voice, sharp, brittle, commanding in that way she always wielded like a blade, was losing its edge. Naomi imagined her in the parlor, pacing, furious, trying to command control over a kingdom that no longer obeyed her. Then came another sound, the click of heels on stone. A cluster of guests appeared near the back veranda, their gowns catching light like spilled champagne. They looked around, eyes narrowing as they took in the empty serving tables, the untouched food, the abandoned champagne flutes. One of them, a woman in a sequined green dress, wrinkled her nose. "Where is everyone?" she asked no one in particular. "Gone," someone answered from behind a tree. Staff walked out. "No way," the woman said. "Over what?" Naomi turned away before she heard the answer. It didn't matter how the story was told now. What mattered was that it had happened. "Miss Naomi," a voice whispered beside her. She turned to see Clara, still in her uniform, her dark curls loose around her face. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear. Something else flickered there. "They're saying Madeline locked herself in the upstairs suite," she said. "Won't come out. The groom's still gone. And now guests are leaving. Some are calling for their drivers." Naomi nodded slowly. "It was never going to hold together," she murmured. Not once the truth showed itself. Clara hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "People are talking about it online already. Look." She handed the device to Naomi, and on the screen was a social media post. Grainy, taken by a guest, but clear enough. It showed Naomi standing before Veronica in the middle of the lawn, her arms at her sides, her chin raised, her voice captured in shaky subtitles. "I won't kneel. Not for you, not for anyone." The post had been uploaded less than an hour ago. Already it had thousands of likes. Comments flooded beneath it. "That's courage." She said what so many of us never could. The maid stood taller than the whole damn family. Protect Naomi at all costs. Naomi's stomach fluttered with something strange. It wasn't quite pride, not yet. It was too raw for that, but it was something close. A recognition, perhaps. For the first time, someone saw her for more than what she did. They saw who she was. She gave the phone back to Clara. "It's going to get louder." "Good," Clara whispered. "Let it." A commotion burst from the mansion doors behind them. Naomi turned just in time to see Veronica Langston marching down the steps, heels digging into the turf, a fury radiating from her like heat off concrete. "You!" she shouted, pointing directly at Naomi. "You're still here?" Naomi didn't flinch. "This is a public lawn, Mrs. Langston." "You think you've won something?" Veronica hissed, voice cracking with rage. "You've humiliated my family, ruined my daughter's wedding. Do you think the world is going to rally around a maid with a martyr complex?" Noah stepped forward from the shadows. "Looks like it already is." Veronica spun toward him, but before she could speak again, another figure emerged. Someone the crowd hadn't seen since hours ago. Daniel Ruiz walked across the lawn, slow, deliberate, every step a quiet storm. He no longer wore his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. His face, always so composed, was drawn now with something deeper, something final. Veronica froze when she saw him. "Daniel, thank God. You need to fix this. Your fiancée—" "She's not my fiancée anymore," he said calmly. Madeline had stepped onto the back patio, pale as salt, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't speak. Daniel didn't look at her. "I came back for one reason," he said, addressing the crowd, his voice carrying. "To make it clear that I will not be part of this family. Not after tonight. Not after what I witnessed." Gasps flared from a cluster of guests. "You demanded that a woman kneel, after she apologized. For a napkin," he said, "and you framed it as respect. But I see now, it was about power, about humiliation, about control." He looked at Naomi. "And you were the only person here who showed any grace." Naomi met his gaze, her throat tight. "I'm going back to New York," he continued. "I've already booked the flight. There will be no wedding, no honeymoon, and no partnership with the Langstons." Veronica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was shattering. And then, from among the crowd, someone began clapping. Soft at first, then others joined. It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't performative. It was quiet, simple, honest. For Naomi. She didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Daniel nodded once more to her, then turned and walked toward the driveway, his footsteps steady. Veronica stood frozen, rage and disbelief curling through her features, but her kingdom was falling around her. Guests turned to leave. Cars rolled down the driveway. The musicians packed their instruments without a word. And one by one, the people who had come for a fairy tale wedding walked away from its ashes. Back near the tent, the staff regrouped. No longer scattered, no longer uncertain. Their expressions were different now. Steeled, unified. "We did that," Marcus whispered. "We really did." Naomi looked at them. Clara with her soft voice but iron spine. Noah, who had never once looked away. Rita, who stood tall as ever in her flower-dusted apron. These people had trusted her instinct. They'd walked out not because she told them to, but because they finally believed they could, and that mattered more than anything. Rita put a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Freedom events." "Damn right." That night, Naomi walked home alone. The streets of Savannah were quieter than usual, as if even the cicadas had paused to listen. She passed by small homes, neon-lit gas stations, corner stores with half-lit signs. Her neighborhood didn't look like much on the outside, but tonight it felt like a kingdom. Her kingdom. a place where she had stood up and others had stood with her. When she reached her apartment, the first thing she did was take off her shoes. Then, slowly, carefully, she took the crumpled napkin out of her coat pocket. It had been in her hand the whole day. A symbol, a spark. She placed it on the kitchen table, and she wept. Not because she was weak, but because something had finally broken free inside her. Weight lifted, a silence shattered, a self reclaimed. And then, as the stars blinked into view over Savannah, Naomi lit a single candle and whispered, "I'm not going back." Not to silence, not to invisibility, not to kneeling. The morning after the wedding that never was arrived without fanfare. No ringing phone, no barking orders, no lace to steam or candles to place. Just sunlight trickling in through Naomi's apartment window, falling in long, drowsy ribbons across her kitchen floor. For the first time in years, she didn't have to rise before dawn. But she was already up, seated at the same small table where she'd once budgeted paychecks down to the last dollar. Now, she was budgeting something far more uncertain, her future. She held a mug of coffee between her palms, the warmth grounding her. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, messages and missed calls flooding in like a tide she wasn't yet ready to face. She glanced at the latest notification. Another message from an unknown number. Another headline. Maid who refused to Neil Sparks' national conversation on dignity in the workplace. She let out a soft breath, equal parts wonder and disbelief. She hadn't asked for this spotlight. She hadn't wanted it. But now that it was here, she knew she couldn't turn away from it either. Not when so many others, quiet, invisible workers just like her, had written to say, "Thank you. You stood for all of us." A knock at the door startled her. She rose, pulled it open, and found Rita standing there, apron still tied around her waist like muscle memory, though she held no tray, no dish, only a smile and a plate wrapped in a cloth napkin. "Cornbread," she said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thought you could use something warm." Naomi smiled as the scent of butter and honey filled the room. She set the plate down on the table. "I can't believe you're up already," Rita said, eyeing her with amusement. "Figured you'd be sleeping in after burning down the Langston Empire." Naomi chuckled softly. Didn't mean to burn it down, just couldn't live under it anymore. Rita nodded and sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. There was only the quiet hum of the street outside, the sound of children laughing as they played, the distant rhythm of a city that kept moving even as her life had screeched to a halt. "I talked to Marcus this morning," Rita said. "Clara, too. They're fired up. You lit a fire, girl, whether you meant to or not." Naomi stared at the cornbread. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Rita said without hesitation. "Means you're about to do something real." Naomi looked up, surprised. Rita leaned in. "Fear and faith feel the same at the beginning. Only difference is what you do with them." Naomi felt her throat tighten. She swallowed. "I've been thinking," she said, "about something bigger, about starting my own business." Rita raised an eyebrow. "You? Planning to boss us around now?" "I'm serious." "I know, and I like it." Naomi took a breath. "I want to build something where people like us don't have to shrink. An event planning company, not just weddings but all kinds. Freedom events. A place where every person, from the planner to the cleaner, is seen, valued, treated like more than a shadow in the background." Rita sat back, her eyes gleaming. "You got a vision, honey. And if you open those doors, I'll be the first one in your kitchen." Naomi blinked, tears pricking at her eyes. "But I won't work under anyone who skimps on cinnamon in my cornbread," Rita added with mock sternness. Naomi laughed, the sound catching in her chest. "Deal." Before she could say more, her phone buzzed again. She reached for it, expecting another news alert. But it was something else. A name she hadn't seen in years. Tyrone. She answered quickly. "Hey?" "Naomi." Her brother's voice came through, rough with emotion. "I saw everything." She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't be," he said fiercely. "I'm proud of you. Everyone's talking about you at the firm. Partners, interns, people you've never met. They're saying your name like it means something, and it does." Naomi didn't know what to say. "You've always been strong," Tyrone continued, "but now the world sees it too." "I'm scared," she admitted again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said. "That means you're exactly where you need to be. I've got some savings. If you need help getting this business off the ground—" "No," she said gently. "I want to build this on my own 2 feet. But thank you. Just hearing your voice helps more than you know." They stayed on the phone a while longer, voices low, laughter occasionally bubbling up between stories from the past and dreams for the future. When she hung up, Naomi felt something new, something light and brave and terrifying. Hope. That afternoon, the door knocked again. This time it was Clara, bright-eyed and breathless, holding a flyer. "Pastor Ellis is organizing a fundraiser," she said, holding the paper out. "For you, for your new business." Naomi blinked. "What?" "He wants to raise money to help get you started. Everyone's backing it. People from church, from the neighborhood, even strangers who saw the video. There's going to be music, food, speeches, and the choir's singing for you." Naomi felt her knees weaken. She lowered herself into the chair, the flyer trembling in her hand. Clara stepped closer. "You showed us we're worth more than we thought. People want to be part of that." Before Naomi could answer, her phone buzzed once again. An email this time. From Daniel Ruiz. Her heart skipped. She clicked it open. "Naomi, I want to thank you for showing me the truth. Not just about Madeline or the Langstons, but about myself. I was blind to the world you lived in while I stood beside you and never saw you. That's on me. I've returned to New York. Starting over. I hope you will too, in your own way. If you ever need help, networking, referrals, even investment, I'd be honored. You're not just a part of a story, Naomi. You are the story, Daniel." Naomi sat with that for a long while. Then, another message came in. This one from Emily Langston. She hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. "I'm sorry, Naomi, I truly am. I've been reading every comment, every article, and I see now how blind I was. What I said. What I allowed. It wasn't just cruel, it was disgusting. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope one day I can be someone who deserves it. Can we talk?" Naomi didn't reply. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't something she could give away like a gift-wrapped box. It was something earned, and Emily would have to prove she meant every word. That night, Naomi stood on her apartment balcony, a light breeze lifting the edge of her scarf. She watched as the city moved on beneath her, cars humming, laughter drifting from windows, someone's dog barking down the street. Life hadn't stopped. Not for the Langstons, not for her. She thought of all the places she'd stood, in kitchens, on marble stairs, at the edge of tents, in front of women who wanted to see her kneel, and now she stood here, not bowed, not broken, but blazing. Inside, the cornbread sat half-eaten on her table, the flyer pinned to the fridge beside a photo of her and Tyrone as kids. Her inbox continued to fill. The world was knocking, asking what she'd do next. Naomi Harris was ready to answer. She whispered the name once, just to herself. Freedom Events. It felt right, because she hadn't just started a business. She'd started a movement. The day of the fundraiser bloomed beneath a sky so blue it felt like a benediction. Naomi stood at the entrance of the church's community hall, heart pounding as guests trickled in. Neighbors, co-workers, strangers from online who had driven hours just to shake her hand. It was surreal, humbling, and more than a little terrifying. "Breathe, Naomi," Rita whispered beside her, nudging her gently with a hip. She wore her best floral blouse and a wide-brimmed hat that seemed to radiate confidence. "You faced the Langstons. A potluck crowd ain't gonna kill you." Naomi managed a smile. The scent of cornbread, fried chicken, collard greens, and peach cobbler wafted from the kitchen, warming the entire hall with something richer than just food. Community. Marcus and Clara were helping Pastor Ellis arrange folding chairs while the choir rehearsed quietly in a corner, their harmonies rising like light. It had all come together so quickly. Less than a week since the rebellion at the Langston estate, and the world Naomi had known had turned upside down. She was no longer just a maid. Her name had become a quiet symbol, passed from mouth to mouth, screen to screen, as a reminder of what dignity looked like when it stood up straight and refused to kneel. The room began to fill. Elderly women from Naomi's old prayer group smiled warmly at her. Teens in sneakers whispered excitedly when they saw her. A local journalist hovered near the back, scribbling in a notebook. Someone played soft jazz on a keyboard, and over it all came the steady hum of anticipation, like everyone was waiting for a moment they didn't quite understand yet, but knew would matter. Pastor Ellis approached the front of the room, clearing his throat into the microphone. "Family," he began. "We are here today not just to raise money for a business, but to honor a woman who reminded us what courage looks like when it's wearing an apron." Laughter rippled through the crowd. He continued, "Naomi Harris stood up so others could rise with her, and now it's our turn to lift her up." Applause followed, genuine and strong. Naomi flushed, but she stood tall. This wasn't about pride. It was about purpose. After Pastor Ellis stepped aside, the choir stood. They launched into the old spiritual her mother used to hum, "Oh, freedom," and Naomi felt her breath catch. "And before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave." The words wrapped around her like a second skin. She closed her eyes, letting the notes settle deep into her bones, as if her mother were there in the room, nodding softly, hand resting on her shoulder. When the song ended, Clara took the mic. She looked nervous but determined. "I used to think being small meant being invisible," she said. "Then I met Miss Naomi. She didn't just tell us to stand up, she showed us how." The crowd applauded again, and Clara turned to Naomi with a smile that said everything words couldn't. Then it was Naomi's turn. She walked slowly to the front, heart hammering, her hands trembling just slightly as she accepted the microphone. For a second, she scanned the crowd. Faces beamed back at her, faces that once wouldn't have noticed her walking down the street. "I've spent most of my life trying not to be seen," she began. "Trying to stay quiet, stay useful, stay small. I thought if I worked hard enough, long enough, someone would finally say, 'You matter.'" She paused. "But no matter how many tables I set or napkins I folded, that moment never came." The room hushed, until the day I said no. There it was, the truth. I said no to kneeling, not because I wanted to cause a scene, not because I was trying to be brave, but because something inside me snapped, something that had been breaking quietly for years. She took a breath. "And what I learned that day is this. Your dignity doesn't depend on who signs your paycheck. It doesn't live in a title or a uniform. It lives here." She touched her chest. "And you don't need anyone's permission to claim it." Applause broke out, some people standing. "I'm starting a business," she said, smiling now. "Freedom events. Not just to plan weddings or parties, but to build something different. A place where no one is asked to shrink, where every person's worth is built into the foundation, where kindness is policy, and nobody has to kneel to be seen." Rita whooped from the front row. Marcus clapped so hard the man next to him laughed. The entire room stood, applause rising like a wave, washing over her, lifting her. Later, as the fundraiser carried on, Naomi wandered the room in awe. People dropped envelopes into the donation box. Local business owners offered free services. An older woman from a nearby flower shop volunteered to supply bouquets for her first few events. A man in a worn blazer who had once been homeless pressed a $10 bill into her hand and whispered, "For standing up when I couldn't." By sunset, Naomi had a clipboard full of names, numbers, and pledges, and a heart that felt swollen with something far larger than gratitude. When the last guest left, she sat beside the donation box and stared at it for a long moment, stunned. Over $6,000, Marcus said, walking over with a grin. And that's just from today. Wait till you see what people are wiring in online. Naomi blinked. I didn't think this would happen. You changed everything, he said. You think people don't notice? They do, and they're ready for better. A car pulled up outside. Naomi looked through the window and froze. Emily Langston stepped out, her movements unsure, her hair pulled back into a low bun. She clutched a paper envelope in both hands. Naomi's heart thudded, but she didn't move. Emily hesitated, then walked toward the door. Pastor Ellis intercepted her kindly. "I'm here for Naomi," she said. "If she'll see me." He glanced at Naomi. "Up to you." Naomi stood. Her palms were cold. Emily approached her slowly. "I won't take long," she said. "I know I don't deserve to stand in this room, but I had to come." She held out the envelope. "It's not charity," Emily added quickly. "It's a reparation. Small, but sincere, and an apology for everything." Naomi took the envelope but said nothing. "I don't expect forgiveness," Emily whispered, "but I'm trying to become someone who might earn it someday." She turned to leave, but Naomi's voice stopped her. "Forgiveness isn't a transaction," she said. "It's a process." Emily looked back at her. Hope and regret tangled in her eyes. Naomi gave her a small nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a bridge. After she left, Naomi stepped outside. The evening air was cooler now, the stars beginning to bloom overhead. She thought of the house she used to clean, the weight of the Langstons' scorn, the fear that used to live in her ribs like a second heartbeat. It was gone now. In its place was something new. That night, she gathered with Rita, Marcus, Clara, and a few other staff members at her apartment. They ate leftover cornbread and poured sweet tea into mismatched mugs. They laughed, they argued over business names and logo ideas, and they dreamed freely for the first time in a long time. "We'll need a kitchen," Rita said. "A real one, not just a backroom stove." "And uniforms," Clara chimed in. "But ones that look good, make people feel proud." "I know someone who can build a website," Marcus added. "He owes me 2 favors." Naomi listened, smiling. Then she grabbed a napkin, unfolded it, and began to write in bold block letters. Freedom Events. Grand Opening Plan. When she looked up, everyone was quiet, watching her. Waiting. "Let's get to work," she said. And just like that, they began building something bigger than all of them. Something made from the ashes of a wedding, from the backbone of a maid who refused to kneel, from the hope of a community ready to rise. And above them, the stars listened, blinking approval in the dark Savannah sky. 1 week later, Naomi stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of a dusty brick building that had once been a bakery. The windows were smeared with time, the front awning faded, and vines curled lazily along the frame. But to her, it wasn't just a storefront. It was a beginning. Inside, the space echoed with memory and potential. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, the air smelled faintly of flour and history, and the sun pierced through the grime-streaked windows like stained glass. It was imperfect, more than she could afford, more than she dared hope for, but it was hers. Or it would be, soon. Rita leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk on her face. "She's got bones," she said, nodding in approval. "All she needs now is soul." Naomi smiled. "We've got enough of that to fill every inch." Behind them, Marcus and Clara carried in folding chairs and supplies, saws, paintbrushes, buckets. A handful of former staff from the Langston estate had joined, too. They didn't talk about that place anymore. It felt like another life, a ghost town they'd walked out of and never looked back. Naomi moved to the center of the space, dragging a stepladder into place. She climbed up slowly, carefully, and began peeling away the rotted sign above the front door. It read Savannah Bake and Brew in faded cursive. Clara looked up. "What are we going to call it again?" Naomi didn't turn. "Freedom Events." The last letter came free with a satisfying snap. Naomi stepped down, holding the old sign in her arms like an artifact. Marcus chuckled. "You think the Langstons ever thought their maid would own her own company?" Naomi's eyes gleamed, but her voice was calm. "I don't think they ever thought about me at all." That afternoon, they scrubbed every wall, scraped every corner, painted the front window white. Naomi worked with sleeves rolled, sweat on her brow, joy in her bones. The community stopped by in waves. Church friends, neighbors, even a few strangers who had seen the video online and just wanted to help. They brought more than support. They brought lumber, signs, business cards, flowers, spare chairs, a vintage typewriter someone thought Naomi would like. One man donated 2 crates of glassware. A local librarian gave a bulletin board. A teenager set up a website, complete with an online booking system and a Meet Our Team page that listed everyone by first name and favorite song. By evening, the space didn't look perfect, but it looked loved. Naomi stood at the back door, her hands on her hips, watching the team paint a large mural along the right-hand wall. It was Clara's idea, a silhouette of a woman standing tall, apron fluttering behind her like a cape, head lifted to the sky. Above the figure, they had painted the words, "We don't kneel, we rise." Rita walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Think they'll get it?" Naomi tilted her head toward the mural. "I don't care if they get it. We know what it means." Rita grinned. "Well, I hope they like cornbread at their weddings, because that's going on every damn menu." Naomi laughed, full and rich. "Let's make that our signature." By the end of the week, they had their first event booked, a retirement party for a local teacher, hosted at the church hall. Not a high society wedding, not a gala, but it was theirs. On the day of the party, Naomi arrived early. She wore a crisp white shirt tucked into navy slacks, her hair pulled back, her name on a sleek badge pinned to her chest. Clara arranged centerpieces, sunflowers in old mason jars. Marcus handled the DJ setup, already bobbing his head to an upbeat gospel song. Rita oversaw the kitchen, where sweet potato pie cooled beside platters of hot fried chicken and butter biscuits so golden they shimmered under the lights. The guests arrived slowly, elders in hats, children in their Sunday best, families who recognized Naomi's face and whispered stories about what she had done. No one asked her to kneel. Everyone shook her hand. At the height of the party, Naomi stood near the back wall and watched the room move. Laughter rose and fell in gentle waves. Music played. Old women danced with bare feet. A man in his 70s stood to give a speech about the woman they were honoring, and he cried halfway through, holding his wife's hand with trembling fingers. It was everything Naomi had dreamed her business would be. Real, rooted in love, untouched by cruelty or ego. When the event ended, Naomi sat on the floor beside Rita, eating a leftover biscuit with honey. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. The silence between them was the good kind, earned, sacred. Naomi's phone buzzed beside her. It was another email, from Emily Langston. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. "Naomi, I passed by the church today. I saw the mural. I saw the people hugging you, celebrating you, and for the first time I didn't feel angry or ashamed. I felt humbled. I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm still trying to be someone worth forgiving. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Thank you for standing tall. You reminded me what I'd forgotten. Emily." Naomi didn't reply. Not yet. But she didn't delete the message either. That night, the crew gathered in Naomi's apartment. They sat on the floor, drinking sweet tea, arguing over the playlist for their next event. Someone brought a cake. Someone else brought folding fans. Marcus unveiled the official Freedom Events banner with a dramatic flourish, and everyone cheered like children on Christmas morning. Naomi stood by the window, watching the Savannah skyline stretch wide under the stars. The lights blinked in the distance like gentle affirmations. She thought of the Langston mansion, of the wedding that never was, of the hallway where she'd leaned against a wall and wondered if she'd made a mistake. She thought of her mother, too. how she used to hum while cleaning houses, gospel rolling off her tongue like a lifeline. Naomi could almost hear her now, and before I'd be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. That line had shaped her, but it was what came next that would carry her forward. She whispered the words to herself, softly, and go home to my Lord and be free. This wasn't heaven. This wasn't the end. But it was freedom, and it was hers. The next morning, she unlocked the front door of Freedom Events for the first time. A brass bell rang overhead, sweet and hopeful. She stepped inside, flicked on the lights, and looked around. The mural, the tables, the shelves lined with handmade decorations, each with a story, the name on the wall. She didn't feel like a maid anymore. She didn't even feel like a business owner. She felt like a woman who had taken back her name, her place, her voice. Naomi Harris walked to her desk, opened the planner, and wrote in bold letters at the top of the page, "Today we rise." And outside, Savannah stirred with the sound of possibility. Naomi's journey reminds us that dignity is not given, it is claimed. For years, she worked in silence, believing that humility meant invisibility, that enduring mistreatment was the cost of survival. But the moment she chose to stand, without shouting, without rage, simply with unwavering grace, she changed everything. Her refusal to kneel wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a declaration. I am worthy, whether you see it or not. This story teaches us that courage doesn't always come with grand speeches or applause. Sometimes it lives in the quiet strength of a woman folding napkins, carrying a tray, or wiping tears in the dark. True power isn't found in titles or money. It's found in knowing your worth and never allowing anyone to make you feel smaller than you are. Naomi didn't just rise for herself. She rose for everyone who'd ever felt unseen, unvalued, unheard. And in doing so, she sparked a ripple of change, proving that even the smallest voice can echo loud enough to shake the walls of injustice. So, wherever you are in your own journey, whether you're serving others, fighting to be heard, or rediscovering your strength, remember Naomi. And remember this: you don't have to kneel to be respected. You only have to rise. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know where our listeners are tuning in across the world. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that moves your heart and inspires your soul.